Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. Great to have you with us, Dave Revson and Dave Wannstedt. I mean, things are good. We've got a playoff set. We have Heisman finalists, 2 from the Big Ten and 1 from Pitt. I mean,
really? I didn't know that. Just wait till we get to that Michigan State.
It couldn't be finer for you.
No, I'll tell you what. It's and a defensive guy, obviously, Nathan.
Yes.
I mean, I'm really excited about having a defensive guy, representing the group and being in the mix to become the Heisman. I thought well-deserved, and that tells me that they don't just take quarterbacks and offensive players, that they look at everybody. So that was encouraging.
If there was a year for the defensive players to be in this thing, it was this year, and I know there's some who believe Will Anderson should be there as well from Alabama. We certainly can talk through that. But again, second time in 3 years, Big Ten's had a defensive representative. Remember, Chase Young was there a few years ago. Let's get to our big story, though, first, and it is the college football playoff. And surely you have seen the bracket by now, but just a reminder, Wolverines end up with the 2 seed. They'll take on third-seeded Georgia. Top-seeded Alabama gets the first-ever Group of 5 team in Cincinnati. Both of the games are on New Year's Eve. We will have extensive Orange Bowl coverage here on the Big Ten Network. Let's dive into that game first. It has been quite a story Michigan has, and you obviously have a relationship with Jim Harbaugh back from having coached him with the Chicago Bears. What particularly stands out to you about the job that Jim Harbaugh has done to get his team here?
Well, everyone's going to talk about, and we'll get into the X and O's part of it in a minute, but watching that game, everyone's going to talk about what an impact this has done this season, the way they finished up, for his family, for his coaches, for recruiting. But it reminded me, and I think I mentioned this once on the show when I was at USC, and the vice president said, "Gentlemen, understand this. There's a direct correlation between how many football games we win and our alumni contributions. I promise you, no one's talking about that. They're talking recruiting and what it's going to do for Jim and his family and the coaches and all that stuff. This is huge for this university. You watch what happens."
Wani, I have a quote in my book from the 1890s where the president of Kansas said the exact same thing.
Well,
I mean, right? So we are talking, this is time immemorial. This has been one of the big stories in college football. And you do see, just the pride that Michigan fans have. I think there was this sense of, I don't want to use beaten down, but they've been so dominated by Ohio State, a team that they saw themselves very much on the same plane on. And historically, not only have they been on the same plane as them, but often they were above them on that plane. And now you go through this stretch of nearly 2 decades of dominance. So, there's no doubt that it brought the pride back. And it means something when it's someone who wore that jersey and had incredible success like Harbaugh did.
And he's doing it. The great thing about this season, Jim truly, I wouldn't have the same feeling, and maybe it's just me and my mentality knowing him, if they would be in this position and they had changed the offense and they went to 4 wideouts and throwing it 60 times a game, we'd be happy. They're in. Okay, God bless them. But they did it Jim's way. You know what I mean?
And Bo's way.
And
this feels like this is a team Bo would really like.
Oh, he would love it. Here's the catch. Okay, we know the matchup for this game against Georgia. Okay, it's Georgia is one of the top defenses in the country, number 4 against the run, giving up 9.5 points a game. That's crazy numbers.
Right.
Okay, so
and that's after they gave up more than 40 to Alabama.
Right.
Think about where it was before. Is it like 5?
Here comes my punchline. Okay, so we know that Michigan is running the ball for over 200 yards. They're one of the top rushing teams in college football. You got one of the top rushing defenses. So now, put that aside. We just said it. I think this is going to be what happened in the Alabama game. Alabama and Bryce Young threw for over 400 yards. Yeah. Alabama beat Georgia throwing the ball. They couldn't run the ball on them.
Right.
So this reminds me of another story, okay, that I'm coaching at USC, and we fly out to Michigan, and we're going to watch Michigan practice. And Bo's on the sideline coaching. Jim's the quarterback. Now, I'm just an assistant coach at USC.
Bo, hold on one second here.
Okay.
Bo let the USC coaches?
Yes, he did. For spring practice, we were done, and he let us fly out there, and I'm standing there watching it, and
that's crazy to me. He would let you in,
and
given that you're probably going to play him in the Rose Bowl.
And I'm watching Jerry Moeller, who's the defensive coordinator. I'm going to take you way back.
Yeah, Gary Moeller.
Gary Moeller, okay.
Right. Yep.
And here's the story. Jim throws about 3 incomplete passes.
Right.
And Bo blows the whistle and says, "Give me the football with no air in it." And we're looking around now. To the people at Michigan, it was almost like an everyday occurrence. The managers just ran over and opened the chest, and they take the football, and it's flat. It hasn't been inflated.
Right.
And they take it out, and Bo says, "Put it down. This is how, if we can't throw it any better than that, this is how we'll practice the rest of the day." And it just it's just running into each other, and then he blows the whistle and says, "Give me the football with air in it, and let's try it again." Well, in this game with Georgia, this could be a game where he's going to be real tempted to put the air in the football, okay, and throw it because, I don't know how much success. We'll see. They're going to test Georgia, but Cade McNamara, whoever the quarterback, for Michigan, they're going to have to make plays in the passing game, I believe, to win this football game.
Okay, so one of the questions I feel like we asked ourselves all year, starting from the very beginning of the year, was Michigan good enough in the passing game? I feel like it's been answered with a resounding yes.
Yes.
I think they have proven they wanted to set the tone early in the year. They wanted to prove to themselves that they could be a really good physical running team because I think they believed from the very beginning that's how they were going to beat Ohio State.
Yep.
Was if they refine the run game. But I think they have shown us here this is they're 40th in the nation in passing efficiency. Are they a great passing team? They are not. Are they a good, above average, top third in college football passing team? They are.
Right.
And clearly you're going to need that to beat Georgia.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the other side, Georgia's going to be looking at Michigan, and they know that they've got to stop the run on their side. And Georgia's about in the middle of the pack, too. I think they're 6th in the SEC in throwing the ball. So they're okay.
Right.
That's not how. So it'll be interesting to see at the end of the day. I think it could come down to who throws the ball and catches the ball the best. Wins this football game.
It's interesting. There's a lot of questions now about Stetson Bennett and whether or not he should still be the quarterback here for Georgia. It feels to me like Michigan's got everything going right now. Like they head into their preparation for this game feeling as positively as you can feel about your team.
Yep.
Every aspect of this team has played well here in 2 huge games over the last 2 weeks. Georgia's got to be questioning everything.
Yeah.
Right? And when you are asking questions, particularly about your offense and your quarterback, it feels to me like you tell me. But if you're going into preparation for a game of this magnitude and you're Kirby Smart, and it's like, here we go again, man. We can't get past Alabama. They're still looming there. First you got to deal with Michigan.
Right.
But this thought of, let's say we do get by these guys. Do we have the right guy at quarterback? Maybe we should be going back to JT Daniels. It feels to me like this is not a great time to be Georgia. You don't want to be refined. You don't want to be working things out. You don't want to be asking yourself macro questions. You want to be asking micro questions, right?
You're 100% right. And that was one of the first questions that Kirby Smart said after the game. We have our starting quarterback because who's the most popular guy on the team and in this town? It's the backup quarterback, right? And he's a 5-star guy, transferred to Georgia from USC. He's got all the numbers and all the social stuff to say he's better. Put him in there.
Right.
So I think Kirby put an end to that real quick. But you're right. He's got to put that Alabama stuff behind him and knowing that it could be in front of him. It's a tough spot to be.
It is indeed. Again, great job by Jim Harbaugh, and I know it means a lot to you to see him get to this point. He's not the only coach in the state of Michigan who had a whole lot of success this year. Michigan State's Mel Tucker named the American Football Coaches Association Region 3 Coach of the Year. For those who may not have their regions committed to memory, there are 5 regional winners. They then choose from that group to announce a national winner in January. Luke Fickell, Sam Pittman, among the other notable regional winners. Well-deserving. And now they get Pitt, which is a challenging matchup. Of course, you have an affinity for Pitt, having played there, having coached there. But even if you took that hat off, I think anyone who looks at this matchup would say, this is troubling from Michigan State's point of view, given they have one glaring weakness on their team, and that is pass defense, and Pitt throws it as well as any team in the country.
Yeah, Pitt throws it as well, and that'll be the matchup. Can they make enough plays? And if they can't defend them, do they pressure them? And Kenny Pickett, we've seen it all this year. The quarterback at Pitt. How about this? 42 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He's going to be at the Heisman ceremony,
yes,
as you mentioned. He won the Jody Unitas Best Quarterback today. He'll probably be the first quarterback drafted. And guess who he's throwing the ball to? Jordan Addison, who's probably going to win the Biletnikoff Award, or has a chance. He's one of the 3 finalists. So that's going to be the challenge for Michigan State. Can they put pressure on them, or do they defend them? The game plan and the strategy for Mel Tucker is going to really be interesting, how he slows down this Pitt scoring attack, explosive offense. I mean, that's going to be the story.
So it seems to me that this is a game where Michigan State, as explosive as they have been this year, and this is a team that can be a big play passing team themselves, but it seems to me you have a back as good as Kenneth Walker. You want to ride him. You want to maybe take some time off the clock, right? Time of possession feels like it matters a little bit in a game like this. How well equipped do you think Pitt is to stop them? This is a good defense. And, Pat Narduzzi is a great defensive coach, as we know. But interesting to see kind of that the balance on their team has shifted a little bit more to the offense this year.
Absolutely. But Pitt's defense, last week they played Wake Forest. They shut them off for 3 quarters. Okay.
It didn't look that way at the beginning, right? It was wild back and forth.
Didn't look that way at the beginning. But the interesting thing, Pitt is second in the nation in quarterback sacks. So, that's another problem, obviously, you got to deal with. But you mentioned Kevin Walker, the third. Can you hold the ball? Can you do what Bo did and take the air out of the ball? Okay, that's what they need to do. Okay, if they could get him to play with the ball like that, they'd be in good shape. But Pitt's a better team. If there were 12 teams, this Pitt would be a chances. They're 6th in the nation in stopping the run. Yeah. So they're a top 10 team on defense, sacking, stopping the run, and obviously a top 10 team on offense. So it's going to be a challenge in all areas. But that's Michigan State's. If I'm Mel Tucker, that's your number one objective, and that gives you the best. Shorten the game. How do we shorten the game? Take the air out of the ball.
It's a Schembechler game.
I love it.
As much as the people in East Lansing might not want to admit it, this is a Schembechler practice game. We're going to turn our attention to hoops coming up next here. We will talk Big Ten surprises, the pleasant, the not quite as pleasant, everything in between. Brendan Quinn from The Athletic going to join us. Next is Big Ten Today. First net rankings of the year came out yesterday. Remember, this is the NCAA's evaluation tool that replaced the RPI 4 years ago. Brendan Quinn from The Athletic tweeting that the Big Ten is going exactly as expected. Little sarcasm there. Purdue number 1, which we probably would have expected. They are in the AP as well for the first time ever. Iowa was next, although they lost Illinois last night. Minnesota, who was picked last by everyone, 36th, undefeated. Michigan is 63rd. Rutgers, thought to be a tourney team, is last. So there's a lot to unpack here, and that brings us to our big interview. And we landed the man who tweeted that, Brendan Quinn from The Athletic. Appreciate you taking the time, Brendan. Again, it's early. I think we need to preface all of this stuff by saying it's early. There's some stuff that's already baked in there that will obviously, as the year goes on, kind of normalize itself. But still, I do think there's some eye-opening stuff. Let us start here with Purdue. You cover the entire country, so you've seen a lot of the elite teams already this year. In your mind, is Purdue the best team right now?
Yeah. I think you have to say, after the Gonzaga loss to Alabama, I think you have to go with Purdue being the best team in the country. Even for a while there, I think you could certainly make the case for Gonzaga, Duke. But today, whatever it is, December 7th, yeah, Purdue's number 1. I think pretty clearly. Right now, the Boilermakers have maybe the best offense in the country. They're number 1 or number 2 in efficiency. They're second. Think about this. They're second nationally on shooting threes at 44%, and they're 6th nationally in shooting twos at almost 60%. So that's a pretty good combination. When you make them from inside, you make them from outside. The balance of that offense right now between what the bigs can do and obviously Ivy, and just that you can't really stop them because you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So on top of that, basically a top 30 defense, pretty good. It's a really balanced team that has, all-American caliber talent combined with depth, combined with great coaching. I don't know what else you could be looking for. And the resume matches, like they've won big games. They've beaten the likes of Villanova. They've beaten Tennessee, right? I think that's right. So they've shown it too. This is not a projection. They've proven themselves.
No doubt. Really, really well-rounded team. And yet they found themselves down the stretch on Friday night in a battle with Iowa. The Hawkeyes turned them over with that press and really, I thought, rallied incredibly well. I mean, it looked for a while there like in the middle of the second half, Purdue might blow them out. And Iowa has been really impressive. I mean, you think about a team losing the National Player of the Year in Luka Garza, another really good player in Joe Wieskamp. And again, lost to Illinois yesterday. They fell quite a bit, actually, overnight in the net. I looked at it this morning. They're 17 now. But still, how surprised are you by the Hawkeyes? I think a team that most people might have thought might end up somewhere middle of the pack, maybe even towards the second half of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I still think they have a lot to prove in terms of how real this is. The win at Virginia was very impressive. To beat Virginia in a game in the 70s, kind of going a little bit against their style. I think if we were going to talk that day, what's it going to take for Iowa to beat Virginia? You're going to think it's going to be having to kind of impose more so of their game, get that game up into the 80s, into the 90s, or at a high possession game. They went to Virginia and won a game in the 70s, so that's very impressive. That said, that's their best win outside of the opener against Longwood, if you're going by Ken Palm's ratings. So there's still a lot to prove. Look, the offense can score, right? I mean, Fran's always going to put a unit out there that gets buckets, and Keegan Murray's been one of the 2 or 3 most impressive players in the league. But, they lose to Purdue, they lose to Illinois. No shame there. But these upcoming games, you need to see them win. I think that in terms of buying in maybe a little bit on this team really exceeding expectations. They have upcoming games at Iowa State, obviously a rivalry game, on the road at Hilton, and then a neutral court game in Sioux Falls against a tricky Utah State team. So those are dangerous games, and we could very well be talking about Iowa State getting some nice resume wins in the next week or so, or, this is 4 straight losses. Maybe that 7-0 start was a little bit of smoke and mirrors. So a lot to prove. I think outside of Keegan Murray being one of the best players in the league, the team as a whole has to prove itself.
He's been fabulous. He's the most improved scorer in the Big Ten. The second most improved scorer in the Big Ten is Johnny Davis of Wisconsin. I'm calling their game against Indiana tomorrow and have been diving into them a little bit. I think it's a really intriguing game. 2 teams that probably have both outperformed expectations to a certain extent to this point. I know you got a chance to see Wisconsin in Maui, in Vegas, the Maui Invitational in Vegas.
Yeah.
Talk about drawing the short straw. I mean, not that Vegas is so bad, but man, it would have been.
Vegas is bad for 8 days, Dave. I'll tell you that for sure. But
could be bad for the pocketbook.
Yes, the year, it's always the big draw on who gets the Maui assignment. You don't want it the year that it's not in Maui. So
okay, but Wisconsin wins this thing, which I don't think many people coming in would have thought they were the team that would emerge. Again, it was a senior-laden team last year. It is a much younger team with the exception of Brad Davison this year. Why do you think they've gelled as quickly as they have? Because I've watched them a ton, not just in this role, but also in then prepping for the game as well. And, man, they seem well connected, Brendan.
They are, and they've had the defense, I think, is legit. They're 15th in the country in defensive efficiency right now. And I think that's real. I think this team can win with the combination of Johnny Davis and an elite defense and can get to the NCAA tournament on the back of that. The schedule's been interesting. Wisconsin's schedule has really played nicely into what Wisconsin does, that Texas A&M, Houston, St. Mary's, those are nice wins on paper against teams that play the same way. That all those teams are going to be 300 plus in tempo this year. So, Wisconsin got good matchups that fit the way they play, and that system, those guys know what they're doing. Greg Gard knows how to coach it. Johnny Davis had great games, and they got some really good wins to build on. The one loss they have is Providence, and Davis didn't play that game. So, they're one healthy, game from Johnny Davis potentially away from being 8-0. But some nice wins. They got a nice rivalry win over Marquette recently. And I think of all the teams getting these two early Big Ten games, I think Wisconsin has the most interesting double matchup. Indiana at home and at Ohio State. Those are real games, and they're going to get a chance to kind of show where they are right now. It really in that league or in this league, because if you look at how everyone expects the standings to go right now, Wisconsin's kind of played itself into the conversation of those being their contemporaries in terms of the tiers of the league. Ohio State, Indiana, that's kind of where Wisconsin has played itself into.
It's interesting, in preparing for that game tomorrow, there was a chart in Wisconsin's game notes that was talking about Greg Gard and his win percentage. And since 1980 in Big Ten games, conference play, those who have been in 50 or more games, he's eighth in win percentage. And it was interesting to note, fifth on that chart was Mark Turgeon. Mark Turgeon behind only Bo Ryan, Bob Knight, Tom Izzo, and Thad Matta. And yet Mark Turgeon no longer at Maryland. Seems like it was somewhat mutual. But what do you make of this move at Maryland this week and kind of where they are? Again, fifth winningest coach, conference play, win percentage since 1980 in an uber competitive league. What do you make of where they are and where they believe they can be?
Well, the fact that it came to this at this point of the year, 3 weeks into the season, shows that it was totally untenable at that point if it couldn't be figured out to at least advance through the year. Here, my philosophy on coaches is be really careful when you fire a guy or gently nudge a guy out the door who goes to the tournament every year. And say what you will about Maryland's March record. And I know one Sweet 16 is not good enough for that program under a coach. But the thing about a coach that always gets his team to the tournament, eventually the bracket falls the right way. Or eventually the buzzer beater falls. Eventually you get a good draw. Something happens, but you got to get there every year. And a lot of programs, some programs in this league have had that experience of thinking that just getting to the tournament every year wasn't good enough. So I understand the angst at Maryland and thinking that it is a top 15 program as opposed to a top 30 program, which is basically what Turge had it at in his tenure. If you just go through, Ken Palm's annual ratings, but the guy competed for Big Ten championships and he made the tournament. That's not that easy to do. And I think a lot of people might have it a little bit twisted of taking that for granted.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, losing at home to George Mason is somewhat indefensible, and they clearly are underperforming a little bit this year. But I'm with you. I wonder what would have happened. Obviously, we can all sit here and wonder. But the COVID year 2 years ago, that was a really good team. It was a really good team. And had they gotten a chance,
there's a good 10, 15 coaches in the country right now who are kind of in that hot seat, whatever you want to call it, conversation where their resume could look a lot different if it weren't for losing that postseason.
Yeah. Brendan Quinn, really good stuff. Appreciate you taking the time out to join us. And we could go on for the entire hour, but we got some more football to talk to. So thanks a lot.
Football always gets in the way, Dave. I understand.
All right. Thanks, Brendan. Outstanding doubleheader of hoops tomorrow on the Big Ten Network. I mentioned I'll be in Madison with Stephen Bardo. A couple 7-1 teams. Indiana, number 22, Wisconsin. Then the undefeated Gophers. Just how good are they? Didn't even have a chance to talk about them. Their biggest test to date. They host Michigan State. Coverage starts with the tip-off show at 6:30 Eastern on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. More bowl chatter next. Wani is back with me. We will dive into a few of the more intriguing matchups as we continue here. It's Big Ten Today. Back on Big Ten Today, here's the entire Big Ten bowl slate. We've already discussed a couple of these games. Of course, all starts in Arizona, December the 28th. You see the Gophers and West Virginia. Maryland headed to the Pinstripe. Purdue faces Tennessee, the Music City. Badgers in Vegas taking on ASU. Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa, all playing on New Year's Day. So let's get into those New Year's Day bowls. And I want to start with the Buckeyes. I think this is a fascinating game. It is the Rose Bowl. It is a huge deal, except when you play in the playoff every year, and that's the expectation. Yeah. And then I do think you kind of have to say, you have to motivate yourselves and say, hey, this is a huge game. I know you have a ton of respect for Utah, a team that will be highly motivated because the Rose Bowl has been something they have been focused on and shooting for ever since they joined the Pac-12, right. And this is their chance.
Yeah, it's the first time going for Utah. And I'll tell you what, I think you just hit it right on the head, River. You know, the preparation, the way I see this thing, Utah is going to be going 90 miles an hour with the excitement of playing Ohio State and getting to the Rose Bowl.
Right.
Ohio State, once they get out there, and they're relatively a young team, once they get out there, they're going to get caught up in it, and they'll be ready to play. The key is, if I'm Ryan Day, what am I getting done in my preparation for the Rose Bowl? That'll be the key of making sure that when you're on campus and you're at home and there's the classes and it's cold and all that, and that you get their minds clear and that you get their attention. Because let me tell you about this Utah team now. Kyle Willingham, the coach there, Willingham, he has done a fantastic job. And this will be, just like Michigan and Michigan State, this will be as physical a football game as Ohio State has played all year long. I went out there when I was coaching at Pitt and played them, and nobody knows about Utah. You know, they're not on the front page every day. They're kind of secluded out there a little bit. And we got off the bus and we found out real quick. We ended up tying the game and lost in overtime, but they hit us right in the mouth, and we were not ready for it, to be quite honest with you. And when you look at this team, the key for this game, Ohio State needs to use that offensive explosiveness that we've seen all year till last week, right, and make this a one-dimensional game. Because, and I say that because when you look at Utah, I mean, they are as good defensively, I mean, with sacks. I mean, they're fourth in the nation in sacks. They're a top 10 team. They're you know, at playing defense. And if this comes down to back and forth, now all of a sudden, Utah, and I just want to be right about my numbers here, they're averaging right now, they are second in the nation, almost 6 yards a carry when they run the ball.
Yeah.
And so what does that tell me? Looking at last week, giving up almost 7 yards a carry against Michigan, that would concern me if I'm Ryan Day. I'm thinking in the back of my mind, we cannot have this game be in the fourth quarter and it be a slugfest. Them one, I'm one. I don't like those odds in a game like this.
Right. It's interesting. There was a quote that came out of the Michigan game. I can't remember who said it for Michigan, but they said, we looked at Ohio State as a finesse team. Now, I'm sure that is going to resonate in Columbus. I do not think they will look like a finesse team next year. I think they're gonna make sure they're more physical at the line of scrimmage. But I mean, Michigan absolutely won that line of scrimmage battle. And you're right. I mean, Utah is a team that runs the ball extremely well and that stops the run extremely well. So it's kind of in a similar mold. And it's going to be a fascinating game. What about, as we move on, what about Iowa and Kentucky? And, you know, this one's interesting. We've been talking about the Mark Stoops connection, but Kentucky is a team kind of along the same lines. It was really built very much in the same image as Iowa. Now, they're a little more explosive offensively than Iowa is this year. But, I mean, again, this is a tough, physical football team.
Absolutely. And the biggest difference here, Iowa, in my mind, Iowa plus 14 on turnover margin, Kentucky a -11. I mean, that is drastically advantage for Iowa. Now, the two sidebars that are really interesting on this, Will Levis, the quarterback, right, for Kentucky, played at Penn State. He's a transfer. So that's interesting for Big Ten people. He's kind of a dual threat quarterback. You know, they used him a little bit at Penn State, right?
They did. He's really talented.
A talented kid. And the other player, too, and I remember talking about this game, Waddell Robinson. I remember when he was a freshman, I believe his freshman year, at Nebraska. We were talking down here doing shows about, could this guy be Rondale Moore type? You know, catch it, run it, backfield. I mean, this guy is a fabulous athlete, and these two guys are playing together on this Kentucky team. So Iowa's defense is going to have to show up big.
No doubt. No, Wan'Dale Robinson, 1,200 receiving yards this year. This is a team that started the year 6-0 and then kind of faded down the stretch. And to me, there are some similarities there with Iowa as well. Of course, we know they got all the way up to number 2 in the country and then didn't go all that well towards the end of the season. Certainly the Big Ten championship game did not go the way they wanted it to. How important, I mean, we see it through the lens of Iowa, of course, but probably for both these teams, finishing on a positive note and taking what was a really good year. And I think both of these teams, if you would have kind of told them at the beginning of the year, this is what it's going to be, they would have said, where do we sign up for that?
Exactly.
But to finish off on a positive note, how big is that?
It's huge. I mean, just to go into the offseason feeling good about it. And you know how I think this bowl game, we all know that Kirk Ferentz, there's nobody in college football that does a better job with the offensive line. And their offensive line at Iowa, you say, why aren't they running the ball with Tyler Linderbaum and throwing it better? Well, I think they've got freshmen, they got young guys in that offensive line. You get extra practices when you go to a bowl game. And I think Kirk Ferentz is going to focus on this offensive line. And this is an area you say, oh, how are you going to get better in 8 or 10 practices before the bowl? Well, I look for Iowa's offensive line. This is a chance for these guys to make improvement before they have to go play Kentucky.
Yeah, they do need to get better. I mean, outside of Linderbaum, this has not been a good line this year, and it's why Goodson hasn't run the ball, I think, to the degree that people thought that he could. Last one I want to talk about is Penn State and Arkansas. Arkansas is a great story this year, Coach. I mean, a really good story. A team, you know, Sam Pittman, an enthusiastic guy, getting his first chance in a job like this, and they completely turned it around. We were mentioning Mel Tucker among those regional coaches of the year. Sam Pittman was one as well. And Penn State, it feels like this is a game, again, if you're trying to carry some momentum into next year, they did not finish the way they wanted to.
They're saying, where is Arkansas on the map, right? I mean, it's not a household name, I guarantee you. And you mentioned Sam Pittman. The interesting thing is, he was an offensive line coach.
Right.
So now put this together, viewers, okay? You got an offensive line coach as the head coach. Do you think they're really going to throw the ball that much? No. You know, they're 13th in the nation in running the football. Here's the question mark I got for Penn State. With their defensive coordinator, Brent Pry, leaving and going to Virginia Tech, right? Are they... Is that going to have an effect on the defense or not? Because they have to be ready to play and obviously play a physical football game against Arkansas. To me, the difference in this game, get right down to the red meat, as Jerry Jones would say. Sean Clifford.
An Arkansas guy.
There's an Arkansas guy. Okay. Sean Clifford is going to have to play big. Dotson's going to have, he's one of the best explosive players in the country. To me, this is the advantage that Penn State has. And Arkansas, 12th in the SEC in sacks. So they're not a big, you know, this is not a Michigan pass rush team or high. I mean, these guys struggle rushing the passer. So you say, okay, these two teams, advantage Penn State, I believe, veteran quarterback, Sean Clifford, best receiver on the field will be Dotson.
Right.
That's where Penn State, in my mind, has an advantage and has to take advantage of it.
I would think the Arkansas guy would want to get to the pork, not the red meat. But that's just
yes, you're probably.
But
I don't know. I don't think
his expression, not yours, right?
Jerry Jones will say it. You get into debate. Let's get right to the red meat, David.
Okay.
That's it.
Well, you spent time. I'm just saying, you know. I mean, we'll Big Suey the whole thing. Heisman finalists announced yesterday. They include 2 from the Big Ten. Aiden Hutchinson becomes the second defensive player to be named a finalist in the last 3 years, as I mentioned off the top, with Coach Chase Young being the other. C.J. Stroud, third straight OSU starting QB to be invited to New York, joining Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields. Alabama QB Bryce Young and Pitt's Kenny Pickett, as we talked about, also invited to the ceremony. And pleased to have Stewart Mandel, the editor-in-chief of the Athletics college football coverage, with us. And Stu, the sense is, to me, that Young probably ends up winning it. Is he the most deserving, in your opinion? Is he the best player in college football this year, without revealing your vote, which I know I don't want to put you in an awkward spot here?
It's a tough debate whether he's the best player on his own team with Will Anderson, the linebacker, who I'm just really miffed didn't even get invited to New York. But Bryce sealed it. Certainly, if you look at his last 3 games of the season, he threw for over 500 yards on Arkansas. That was an Alabama school record. He rallied them back with that great 97-yard drive in the Iron Bowl. And then you couldn't ask for a better closing statement than doing what he did to a Georgia defense that had been so dominant all season long. So he's absolutely going to be, a worthy winner. But it was a year for a lot of great defensive players as well.
No doubt. How about the playoffs? So we spent a lot of time here yesterday debating 1 versus 2 and whether Michigan maybe should have been number 1. I listened to you on the Audible with Bruce, which is a great podcast for those who love college football. The Audible podcast, fabulous. And you guys spent a lot of time debating 3 versus 4 as well. What do you think? I mean, ultimately, are these guys in the right order, in your opinion?
I think so. You're right. Michigan, especially the way they played over those last 2 games, just so dominant, again, in 2 very big games, has a case. I think it was hard for the committee to not put Alabama number 1 after what they did to Georgia, because Georgia was the almost season-long number 1 team in the country. Their defense had been, going into that game, their defense statistically had been the most dominant in the sport in a decade. And Alabama put up, 41 points on them. So I just think that one performance, that one win, lifted them to the top over Michigan. 3 versus 4, that's just a me and Bruce debate. He thinks it should be Cincinnati. I think I think Georgia, I think the committee, one thing to understand is I do think they try not to penalize the losers of the conference title games too much, because there's an acknowledgement that they're playing an extra game that others are not. And in this case, it was not a good performance for Georgia, but it wasn't against a nobody. It was against what was at the time the number 3 team in the country. So right. I understand why they stayed ahead of Cincinnati.
Right. And so, but part of this debate is, when you say, well, Alabama shredded Georgia and we know how great this defense was, maybe the defense wasn't that great. I mean, and you guys talked about this, and we talked about it yesterday on our show. Georgia hasn't played a great schedule this year. The best team that they beat is Clemson, who is number 19 in those rankings. So is it possible that great Georgia defense was based on the fact that, yes, they're very good against overmatched opponents, and that when they met someone with like talent, or in the case of Alabama, maybe even superior talent, that we learned that they are really, really good, but perhaps they were overrated. And so the whole premise of, well, we're moving Alabama to number 1 because they beat this great Georgia team is based on the notion that Georgia was great. Maybe they weren't great, Stu.
It's a bit of a circular argument.
It is a circular argument, isn't it? Yeah. Yes.
I think they ran into Bryce. I mean, I think Georgia played a bunch of good but not great teams necessarily, and they certainly never faced a quarterback like Bryce Young. And we've seen this many times in the postseason. I mean, I think the way college football is now, you can have the greatest defense in the world, and if you run into, and the example I would use is the 2016 Alabama defense was amazing all year until they ran into Deshaun Watson in the national championship game. A great quarterback like that can neutralize even the best defenses. So you're right. They did not play a team with a quarterback like him, but I don't know that it would be any different if somebody else ran into Bryce Young on a good day. So
I hear you.
It's not a perfect answer either way. but I understand the committee's logic.
I mean, other than the fact that he looked completely ordinary the week before against a very average Auburn team, other than the last drive, as you pointed out. But before that, I mean, he looked like just a quarterback who was lost, frankly.
Well, the interesting thing about that, and you're right, the whole Alabama offense did a complete 180 from the Auburn game to the Georgia game, is that, I've been saying for weeks, this is not a great Alabama team like the ones Nick Saban has had in the past. And I think even he realized that, as you could tell from some of his post-game comments. And for whatever reason, their offensive line that could not block Auburn in the Iron Bowl, could not protect Bryce Young, played its game of the year against what had been the best defensive front in the country in Georgia. That's college football, right? You never know from one week to the next which version of a team is going to show up. And by the way, I think if you're making the case for Michigan, and it's a legit case, that team has been the same team, I feel like, week after week after week. You know what their identity is. They were dominant in almost every game this season. The Michigan State game, even, you remember all the controversy when the committee kept them ahead, kept Michigan ahead of Michigan State. That was them saying, look, Michigan dominated that game for most of the game and then blew it at the end. So, certainly consistent. I think Michigan has been by far a more consistent team over the course of 13 games than Alabama.
I do want to get to a couple other things with you. And by the way, I agree. And you can nitpick every team. I mean, Michigan very easily could have lost to Nebraska. They played a very poor second half against Rutgers, but they have finished really strong. And again, I think you could have built a compelling argument. But I want to get to a couple other things with you. The coaching carousel is the craziest that we have seen. The big news yesterday, Mario Cristobal leaving Oregon. He's going to Miami, $8 million a year. It's his alma mater. He is deeply connected, obviously, in Miami. He did just get crushed twice in 3 games by Utah, but I get it. I understand that he is a really good and really well-respected coach. But what does all of this tell us more broadly? The money that's being thrown around, Miami, not a place that typically throws it around. Now they're doing it. What have we learned here in the last month about college football coaching?
That's exactly right. This is the year, and we went from 2020, where people, where schools were furloughing employees and cutting sports teams because the pandemic was, racking with everybody's budgets, to this is the year it felt like everybody just threw caution to the wind and said, we're going all in on football. And that's not just the ones that made coaching changes. Look at Michigan State, giving Mel Tucker this massive contract, James Franklin at Penn State as well. The dollar figures you're seeing for the coaches that are being hired, Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley, although that one's not necessarily fully known, Cristobal. The era of frugality in college football lasted 1 year. And I feel like not only did it correct itself, it overcorrected itself. And it's not sustainable. If this is how it's going to be, you're going to see some just disastrous financial decisions. Because as we know, not all of these coaches are going to work out, right? Lincoln Riley seems like a perfect hire. Brian Kelly's obviously extremely accomplished. Mario Cristobal is the consummate Miami guy. The chances that all 3 of them are going to lead their teams to national titles, is not very good. So, and then what comes next? The ridiculous buyouts.
Right.
So I don't know what can be done about it, but I think college football schools have put themselves in a very precarious situation. A very, frankly, alarming situation with the amount of money that's being thrown around.
Yeah, your next book will be College Football, the Frugality Era, and it'll just be a brief pamphlet. It'll be 1 or 2 pages. Hey, before I let you go, real quick here. The college football playoff expansion, nothing happened last week. You literally wrote the book on the college football playoff. In 30 seconds, where do you think this is going?
I think it's eventually going to a 12-team playoff, but at the rate things are going, it might not happen before the end of the current contract. There's just a real stalemate right now where each of the conferences has their own agenda in this. And in particular, I think the fact that the ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12 are aligned in the alliance, they just feel fundamentally different about this than the SEC and the Big 12. So they've got another meeting in January. We'll see if they can reach some sort of compromise. If not, don't be surprised if this gets tabled until the end of the current contract.
Got it. Stu Mandel, editor-in-chief of the college football coverage at The Athletic. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.